Right. Welcome, everyone. Hi. Thank you for clapping, Liz. I appreciate that. I want to, on behalf of the Gephardt Institute for Civic and Community Engagement and our Civic Scholars Program, I want to welcome you to our Pecha Kucha presentations, which is, I'll share a little bit more about what that is. But first, I want to introduce myself. I'm Teresa Kuo. I'm the Assistant Director for Civic Engagement Education at the Gephardt Institute. And I have the privilege and pleasure of leading the instruction of the course and the program for these wonderful civic scholars who are going to share a bit more about what they've done in terms of their civic summers and civic projects. So Pecha Kucha is a presentation style that in Japanese, Pecha Kucha means chit-chat. So it's really about starting a conversation. It's a short presentation style. It's very particular. It's 20 slides in 20 seconds, but we've made 20 slides, 20 seconds each, but we've made a modification. They're doing 15 slides, 20 seconds each, so it'll be about a 5-minute presentation for each of them, which is not enough time to capture all of the brilliance that they've done in the summer, but hopefully a conversation starter to tell you more about what they did work on, the impact that they had in community. I want to start by saying a little bit more about the program. The Civic Scholars Program is around developing civic leadership and agency among some of our best and brightest here at WashU. This is just a small group of young people who are contributing to our thriving communities, and through the program are able to invest in communities, invest in partnerships with a $5,000 grant. And that's a part of what they use to fund their summers with the support of generous donors who we'll talk a little bit more about later. The project is just a component of the program. It is a tool and a process that we use to help students understand what does it mean to be in partnership with others, what does it mean to be in community with others, and how do I understand my leadership and who I am in the context of the communities that I hope to serve. So it is not the end-all and be-all. They still have one more semester with us, and so this presentation is the culmination of that project, but we will spend the next semester really reflecting and really thinking about how do we integrate civic agency and the values and principles of the civic lives we want to lead when we leave WashU. So this is one piece of that. And we are so thrilled to have so many supporters in the room to hear about all that they've accomplished over the summer. So with that, I want to invite Haley Allen, who will be our first. We'll have the first half of the group go first and then do an intermission at around 6 p.m. with reception treats out in the main lobby, and then we'll come back for the second half of students. And so please feel free to applaud after, and if you have any questions about their projects, please feel free to connect with them during that reception time. All right, Haley.
All right. Start whenever. Okay, so this past summer, I went to Kenya to do my Civic Scholars project, and I partnered with the Riley Orton Foundation. So you guys are probably wondering why I went all the way to Kenya to do my Civic Scholars project, and there's so much work that can be done in St. Louis. So I'd like to give you guys a little bit of background about myself and kind of how I got to this point. So the summer after both my freshman and my sophomore year of college, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Tanzania to study Swahili. And Swahili is the national language of both Kenya and Tanzania. So while the program that I was on focused mostly on Swahili, I also learned so much about the culture, the politics, and just so much about the East African region as a whole. So I came back to WashU really just kind of hungry, wanting to make a difference, and wanting to give back to a region that I felt like had given me so much. Spending 2 full summers fully immersed in this culture. So most of my time this past summer was spent working at the Akili Preparatory School, which I want to give some background on because it's a really cool story how this actually came to be about. So it was founded by 2 local Kenyan men who grew up in the Obunga slum, which is just outside of Kisumu, and they witnessed firsthand the impact that their mothers had to deal with, like raising a family and dealing with income inequality and lack of access to education, and just the cycle of poverty that can be so hard to break out of sometimes. So they went off to college, they got their degrees, and they came back and they opened up what initially started as the Akili Library. So the Akili Library in the Obunga slum was a huge hit. They realized it was constantly full of youth, mostly young girls, but this was problematic because the girls were coming to the library and they weren't going to school. So they realized that the need was much larger than just a library in the community, and they decided to take a risk and open up the Akili Preparatory School, which is a fully funded boarding school that caters to girls from the slum. It provides them with education, meals, uniforms, and so much more than that. So after opening up the Akili school, they realized that they needed to get non-governmental organization status in order to keep it sustainable and running. So that's kind of where the Riley Orton Foundation was born out of that. So my role in this, I was able to partner with this foundation and live with David, one of the founders, along with his family, and then also Rose, who was one of the teachers at the school, who I worked very closely with. So the foundation does a lot of work with sustainability, microfinance, and things like that. But the project that I was working on was known as the Literacy Garden. So the Literacy Garden was not only an after-school project to help these girls improve their literacy skills, but it was also an outdoor space, kind of like an outdoor classroom. And it was located on the beautiful banks of Lake Victoria, just overlooking this lake. It was a great place and provided an environment for these girls to go outside of the classroom and just kind of express themselves and work on their literacy skills. So they did things from storytelling to poetry to singing and dancing, a variety of different things that ultimately enhanced their literacy, but also was just a fun space to work on public speaking skills, confidence, and then also to just talk about tough topics that these girls face on a daily basis. So my role was really working with the teacher, Rose, kind of being her right-hand man, whatever she needed. So I did a lot of writing curriculum, facilitating discussions, teaching classes, tutoring, and things of that sort. And ultimately, my role was small, but I was super humbled to be able to be a part of this program. The girls were so happy every day to just come and express themselves, write stories, read poems, things like that. And I was so glad to be able to be a part of it. Because like I said, it was a voluntary program after school that nobody had to go to, but they all decided to come after spending 8 hours in school just because they wanted to be better and get an actual education, which is something many of us take for granted. So I wanted to leave with a quote that's going to come up on this last slide, but for now, I'll just talk. So it can be really discouraging sometimes, I think, for all of us who work within civic engagement and community service, when we're working on such big projects such as poverty and gender inequality and education, to get discouraged and to feel like what we're doing doesn't really matter. But I kind of kept this quote in the back of my head throughout my summer, and it'll come up shortly. My timing's a bit off. There we go. So small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. So although I was able to be a small part of this overall change and had limited time and resources to donate, when multiplied by millions of people and across a lifetime, it can really make a difference. So shameless plug, here's the website. Sorry. It's RileyOrtonFoundation.org if you guys are interested in donating at all or sponsoring a child. It can really help the community and make a difference. So thank you guys.
Marcel Brown was released on July 18th, 2018. This is a picture of him and his family right after he was released. His conviction was vacated, meaning it was completely neglected in June of 2018. The judge in those comments said that 2 to 3 weeks more would do nothing. And I think this kind of symbolizes the problems with the criminal justice system as I saw it. And this summer, I tried to answer the question, what does good legal representation mean for currently incarcerated folks? And beyond that, like, how can we holistically represent them? And as a result, I worked with two organizations, the Center on Wrongful Convictions, the CWC, in a 9-week full-time internship as an undergraduate legal intern, and volunteered part-time at the John Howard Association, a prison justice organization that monitored Illinois prisons and advocated for prisoner rights. And at the Center on Wrongful Conviction is where I met Marcel Brown. So these are the two offices, and even the offices just demonstrate the different resources that these two organizations have. The CWC was connected with Northwestern and had a lot more financial capabilities. The JHA was a smaller nonprofit, and I think these symbolize some of the issues that encountered. Also, their focuses were different. The CWC focused on exonerations and with people who weren't guilty, and John Howard Association instead, a lot of what I did was write back to currently incarcerated folks about administrative directives and policies so they could advocate for their own rights in the system. Christine Bunch was a client of the CWC, and the CWC, even though they didn't have as large of an impact in terms of people, they had a very direct impact, and Christine Bunch's story emphasizes that. Christine Bunch was convicted of murdering her son, and her story kind of resembles how motherhood is criminalized. And we got to hear her speak and got to form a personal relationship with her and her organization, which specifically centers on justice for exonerated people because there aren't the same resources available. They don't have resources for when they get out. And she co-founded this with Juan Rivera, pictured in the bottom left. And that kind of symbolizes how important it is and how lacking it is that these people don't have resources for basic housing needs, for job readiness skills. And hearing that, that's not something that you necessarily hear in the typical narrative of incarceration. Beyond just those personal connections, the CWC also keeps in touch with its past representatives. And this is a picture of Jacques Rivera's trial. He successfully sued the Chicago Police Department for $17 million. And I think this resembles that power in the legal system is with many people. It's with the police, it's with the lawyers, it's with the prosecutors. And getting to see that trial happen, getting to see those closing arguments was a really powerful story of how power can be corrupted and how power is taken by people who don't necessarily deserve it and enforced on people who don't have the power to fight back. But he did, and he won. And so also one of the things that we got to do this summer was observe courts and judge justices on the, kind of create memos on the judges of what it means to represent fairly. And then finally, I worked with a team. This was a team of interns that was really exciting to meet and get to know them. And we all came from different perspectives, but being able to be in the same workplace was a really informative opportunity for me. And beyond just the team, also the staff itself, here I am pictured with some of them, was just a great experience of learning what holistic advocacy means and how they advocate for their clients. So it's about creating cross-sectional alliances, because even if you don't love the prosecutor you're working with, they're gonna like you and they're gonna be better to your client if you have a relationship. And to bring it back to Marcel, Marcel was one of the most influential parts of my story. He is someone who I built a friendship with beyond just the center, and he's someone who I helped support even after he was out of incarceration because his family was working day-to-day jobs. And I guess this brings me to my final point. I don't know necessarily where my goal is in the legal field. There are so many opportunities for justice, but I've tried to continue to work in this field and working at the MacArthur Justice Center currently to work with incarcerated folks on what it means to have fair representation.
My name is Maddie, and I spent my civic summer in Sacramento, California, researching affordable housing alternatives. I come from a background in architecture, so I'm interested in the power of design to create democratized space. And I wanted to join the conversation on affordable housing access to prevent displacement and escalating levels of homelessness in the city. So I worked in the City of Sacramento's mayor's office, which was my first exposure to the obstacles of city government. And I knew I needed to understand the local need from a resident perspective and recognize where the private, city, and state barriers to creating equitable housing prevailed, especially as a newcomer to the City of Sacramento. So I had the opportunity to communicate with homeowners, people experiencing homelessness, business owners, community leaders, landlords, tenants, local housing authorities, and political officials to grasp the nuanced reasons for our regional failure to secure a stable housing pipeline and to appreciate the lived experiences of those facing eviction from their homes. So these conversations took place all across the region of Sacramento, involving a variety of personnel, audiences, and topics. For example, after a series of violent gang-related episodes near the children's playground in a historically poor community called Oak Park, I joined a Sacramento Police Department discussion, and we strategized better relationships between distrusting residents and law enforcers. I would frequently return to the Oak Park Community Center for Tuesday evening neighborhood association meetings to listen to a diverse crowd of parents and teachers and homeowners to discuss their concerns for gentrification in the area. So one connection led to the next, and I found myself speaking with elderly residents facing eviction from an assisted living complex, biking with a group of new urban planners to tour the city and visit various in-project housing developments. And I gathered with Oak Park residents to discuss the potential of forming a community land trust to help homeowners build equity. I was learning about future transit-oriented development by meeting with a planner at the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, sitting at board meetings for housing nonprofits such as the Sacramento Housing Alliance and Mutual Housing California, and meeting one-on-one with housing leaders and just cause eviction advocates over coffee. And many people were extremely kind, and they would answer my questions about their personal housing hopes and struggles, helping me form a better picture of what outdated development policies existed, how existing land could be utilized to its fullest potential, and how one can minimize governmental barriers to building the small lot and attached home the Sacramento area needs. At a story circle, 30 diverse people with unique housing histories shared anecdotes about what made a house a home and their personal tribulations with the Sacramento housing market. And a lot of people ended up in tears, and I ended up growing a great appreciation for the common citizens' need to be heard since spending time with the passionate and displaced people of Sacramento. There were also angry members of the public who stepped up to the podium at weekly city council meetings who spoke of $1,500 rents at establishments with no air conditioning and rat infestations. They needed solutions immediately, not in a year following the implementation of the mayor's with what I thought was well-intentioned yet distantly productive one-set sales tax increase. So I developed and designed a community profile for the neighborhood of Oak Park to illustrate the impact UC Davis investment has had on the community. And the increasing property values and gentrification close to the Med campus were demonstrated in these graphics that I made that were presented to the chancellor during a walking tour of the area. I even had the opportunity to help organize and map August National Night Out, which was an evening event which was designed to encourage relationship building between local law enforcement and residents. PD thought that knowing familiar faces and stories might make residents more comfortable contacting police in difficult and dangerous situations, so we distributed over 1,000 popsicles to youth and other residents to spur conversation. And when I was not migrating between meetings, I was working in the District 5 office at City Hall, taking constituent calls, creating community profiles, assisting council members. And so I'd answer phone, record complaints concerning illegal dumping, homelessness, cannabis use, rent control, and report the situation to the associated government entity, such as PD or code enforcement. And finally, I summarized the key issues I discovered in my personal and political interactions in a housing document that was sent out to the mayor and his city staff following a city council housing workshop in August. So here are a few samples of my work. The report provided a brief analysis of Sacramento's housing stock, as well as recommendations for the greater creation of favorable housing across the city. So I am now relocated geographically and mentally from Sacramento, so I'm only able to stay updated on the current situation by emailing my mentors from City Hall and watching recordings of city council sessions online. but I don't think my project's going to come to a definite end because there's analysts and planners and brilliant activists and passionately motivated residents that I know personally now who are working tirelessly to answer the same questions I was. I hope to utilize my passion for design and health and housing to foster social change and perhaps restructure the way we label private space to create more equitable environments in the future. So, thank you.
So the Saturday before my semester began, I was here at the Kinloch 70th anniversary celebration. The first thing that someone said to me when I arrived was, "Who are your people?" And this simple question spoke to the sense of Kinloch as a large extended family, and is the reason why I wanted to study Kinloch's community by interviewing its former residents. To give you some background, Kinloch is the first all-black city in the state of Missouri and had a peak population of 10,000, which has declined steadily since the 1980s to now being under 300. At its peak, it was a self-sustaining community, mostly because it had to be. It was incorporated as a result of a segregation battle over a local high school, and as a result, had its own school district, fire, police, post office, all the amenities that any small town anywhere in the United States might need to have to service its citizens. As these pictures are showing, there's not much left in the town as it is now. Most of the people and most of the built fabric and most of the infrastructure is gone or is decaying. The police station and the fire station remain, though with much smaller forces, and there are still some churches in the area, and the city government is still intact as well, but beyond that, there isn't much else of the former town. I wanted to understand how did it get like this. I wanted to understand what was the process that drove the decline, and I wanted to know what the future for a town like this might be. How might the citizens be able to band together to recreate the town that they once knew, or even a new town in its place? And my summer started here at Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church, where I witnessed a service that testified to the strength of the bonds formed in Kinloch, and where I was welcomed by community members excited to share their story with me and the story of their town with me. I was invited to this church by Mrs. Emma Strickland, who became my community liaison, so to speak. She helped me connect with other residents of Kinloch. In our interview, she stressed to me that what gave Kinloch its strength was the spirit of its people. She called it the Kinloch spirit. A quote that she said that really exemplified this to me was, "They're diehards. Those people that are still there are not leaving ever. I think that they'll just die there." And that just really shows the attachment towards this place that these people hold. Mrs. Nancy Wright, one of the oldest former residents that I interviewed, pointed out that it was an all-black community, but still had a diversity of jobs and income levels and faiths, and that they all got along because they loved one another, supported one another, and communicated with one another. Important pillars for any strong community. The airport buyout in the 1980s got a lot of the blame for the decline of Kinloch. But Mr. Will Carter, a third-generation business owner in Kinloch, pointed out that desegregation cost the city its schools and also allowed its richer residents to leave the community, which greatly diminished its tax base. Mr. John Wright, the last superintendent of Kinloch City Schools, noted that the character of the city began to shift as lower-income residents moved in with the housing projects that were built in Kinloch, though he stressed that Kinlochians remained resourceful and hardworking people. Even so, that Kinloch spirit that once united the city was starting to fade as these new residents moved in. And at the same time, there was a sense that everything was falling apart, to use the words of Mrs. Vera Johnson. And this drove she and many other Kinlochians to leave this community in search of better opportunities elsewhere, better housing, better schools, etc. And that made the airport buyout that much easier. And this contributed also to a sort of brain drain in Kinloch, which in Mr. Robert McDonald's eyes cost the city its leadership and the talent that it needed to sort of steer it through this shrinkage crisis that was on it. And as a result of some combination of these four factors I just identified is where Kinloch is today. And now developers are eyeing Kinloch once again. And most interviewees believed that commercial and industrial outfits like this Schnucks warehouse will dominate Kinloch in the future. but they remain hopeful that new housing will come to Kinloch, and with it, new residents. One promising development on that front is the Suburban Heights Apartments, which is marketed to UMSL students currently. And many of the interviewees expressed excitement about students moving into their town and hoped that students would take root there and become part of Kinloch's future. This hope is a testament to Kinloch's resilience and determination. And as we grapple with an uncertain future, it's important that communities all over America exhibit these qualities. I'm still piecing together Kinloch's story and trying to tease out the lessons that there are to learn from it. But as a future urban designer, I hope to be able to apply what I've learned from Kinloch towards designing and building resilient communities that foster deep attachments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ria, and this summer I worked at Karani, which is an architecture studio that specializes in redesigning and improving existing learning spaces. So that includes K-12 like classrooms, spaces in university settings, as well as adult educational and training spaces. So the reason I was interested in this is because I'm a design and education student, and I've always been interested in how design can influence a student's experience in school, specifically the physical environment of schools, because while there's justified concern and attention on things like teacher training and curriculum, this aspect of schools and classrooms is completely overlooked. And I think that's kind of crazy that the quality of classrooms have actually been the same in the US for like 60 to 70 years. We're using the same classroom setting and organization that was there in the 1960s, despite teaching methods changing, despite curriculums advancing, and despite the entire lifestyle of students today completely changing in 70 years. So I was at the Center for Social Innovation in New York, which is a co-working space for social enterprises like Karani. And it was a really interesting space for me because, of course, you could get your dogs to work. But besides that, the open environment allowed you to interact with other organizations that were involved in other work. So there were a lot of women issues organizations, there were other educational organizations, and organizations involved with prison reform. And we could really interact and talk with them and see how their work impacts ours and how our work impacts theirs. So to begin with, as the design intern, I got to look back at a lot of their old work that the organization had done and see how they use design principles and specific design principles to impact specific learning outcomes. So how would you create a space for specific individualized reading spaces? How would you create a space for collaborative studio projects? And so after like learning about these principles and like speaking with a lot of past clients and seeing how they use those spaces now, I got to actually work on a school in Brooklyn called the Academy for College Preparation and Career Exploration. The school had one major issue, was that their literacy rate in the school was very low, and a lot of their students just had a really low level of engagement with their literature classes. So they wanted to like totally transform their classroom and make it a space where they felt comfortable and more engaged with the material that they were working with. So I got to work on the furnishings of this classroom and see how we could have like interactive games and tools embedded in the environment that would really encourage the students to just come in here and actually like have them engage with it and want to be a part of that space. Beyond that, we also started to focus on a lot of internal research and how we could change the timeline of building these spaces. Because a school now, if they want to create a new space, and especially like a quality space and go to like an expert on learning spaces, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of time. It takes around 9 to 12 months minimum. It takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of effort, and a lot of schools don't know who to approach in these situations. So we started to, all the interns started to work together, and we started to really brainstorm and think of ways we could make this kind of architecture for schools and learning spaces specifically more accessible, cheaper, and faster. Because schools shouldn't have to wait like so many months to create quality learning spaces to teach their students. So one of the things that we came up with was, a proposal we came up with was to create a catalog of prefabricated classrooms that the organization had already made for like well-renowned schools, and how we could make that available for schools and communities that really need it. And they would just go through this catalog, pick whatever they wanted, would get these prefabricated classrooms delivered to them in 3 weeks, and they just had to assemble it. So you have this quality classroom in 4 weeks and for like a quarter of the price. Throughout this process, even though we were pitching a lot of business models, one thing that really struck me and I really learned was the importance of collaborations between these designers and teachers and students. Because I think when we're building a house, we all want to be involved in the process of how our bedroom looks, what color the walls are, and what effect that has to us when we enter that space. And I think that's so important to involve students in that process, because not only does it like increase their appreciation and value for that space in their education, but it empowers them, it builds community, and also increases their motivation. And I think it's so important because speaking to a lot of students and teachers, we saw that they want to. They were so excited that we were even asking them questions about their current spaces. And so I think it's super important for that element of collaboration so we can create spaces that truly make students feel safe and isn't a place where they want to just leave at 3 p.m. when the bell rings, but where they want to stay and create and learn and build community. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Marissa Lerner, this summer I went to Quito, Ecuador to work on urban resilience and sustainability. Since I was young, I've been fascinated with nature and plants playing in my mother's garden, and over time this morphed into a passion to help the world both mitigate and adapt to climate change. I've always loved Spanish and Latin American culture, and this summer I sought to explore both and see how they relate. Quito is the capital of Ecuador. It's a city of roughly 2.5 million people, nestled among the Andes, mountains, and volcanoes. The official language is Spanish, and I committed to Quito without a set-up program, without a familiar face, and without much structure other than my job. It was one of the most personally challenging things I've ever done, but I knew growth and personal resilience would come from pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. Urban resilience refers to the ability of people, communities, and systems forming a city to survive, adapt, and grow, regardless of the type of acute shocks and chronic stresses they experience. In Quito, possible acute shocks include heavy rainfall and flooding, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. Chronic stresses include physical vulnerability of households, socioeconomic vulnerability, and biodiversity loss. And this image is from the Quito Resilience Strategy that I was helping to implement this summer. I was working in the city's General Planning Secretariat on the resilience team. My boss was David Jacome Polit, Quito's Chief Resilience Officer, pictured here. And our third colleague was Denise Paredes, a technical assistant. David and Denise are brilliant, caring, and passionate about enabling a climate and economically resilient Quito in socially just ways. Each Monday, we would plan the week's tasks in this coffee shop, Café Catedral. Much time was spent in the office reading policy, researching sustainable urban agriculture, or creating a video for resilience trainings for neighborhood leaders. But I was also fortunate to go on site visits around the city. This day, we visited informal settlements vulnerable to earthquakes with Juan Caballero, who's on the rightmost. And he was an architect from Build Change who was designing Quito-specific building reinforcement programs to protect lives and mitigate future damage from earthquakes. One of my main focuses was helping Quito develop a sustainable food plan. We met regularly with multi-stakeholder group consisting of professors, farmers, industry reps, and consultants. We worked to create a shared vision, food charter, and the first draft ever of a sustainable food plan for Quito, preparing the city to face incoming refugees and impacts of climate change. One of the most valuable lessons I learned was the importance of getting multiple perspectives into the same room. Meetings like this, called a mesa de trabajo, people representing different identities and facets of the same issue could discuss face-to-face the most important problems and focus areas moving forward. David was also an incredible role model, navigating difficult conversations with grace and humility and amplifying voices that hadn't yet been able to speak. This is with Gephardt visiting urban agriculture sites where farmers can be trained and get the resources to start their own gardens. This program has empowered hundreds of Quiteñans, many of them women, who are proud to have their own income and provide healthy food to their families and neighbors. This is the view from my apartment. Each morning I would wake up, feel the energy of the city, and be inspired to continue learning about urban resilience and continue implementing Quito's resilience plan. But on my bus ride and walk to work, I was confronted with the stark reality of migrants, Venezuelan refugees, and inequality that plagues so many cities. These two visions of the city were constantly intertwined. This is the view from, just kidding. Quito's food culture enabled me to further explore these two Quitos. Here is my favorite meal, maduras asados con ceviche mixto, and I ordered it at least once a week. On the street, Venezuelans were selling arepas and empanadas, slightly different than the classical Quito version, and my Venezuelan friends showed me how to make these classics and how much they miss the taste from home. As food and conversation taught me about the complexities of inter-country Latin American dynamics, I also explored the natural landmarks to learn more about the Ecuador outside of Quito and challenge myself. Quilotoa, a volcanic crater lake, is pictured here. I got a deep appreciation for Ecuador's natural beauty, and also conversations with indigenous peoples illuminated more identities and dynamics of which I was previously unaware. The more I learned about urban resilience and sustainability in my work, the more I thought about how we can create such resilience on an individual level, for that's the basis of larger scale resilience. What really creates community, and how do we show up for each other? Nights like this, cooking hamburguesas with my female friends brought warmth, strength, and a sense of place. I'll start to exploring this. On weekends, I played ultimate frisbee with the local team, many of them Venezuelan refugees, and through the sport, we connected instantly. We discussed everything from their families to the environment to the meaning of life, all in Spanish, and they have incredible personal resilience, and they really challenged me to rethink how I define community. I miss them a lot, and we still talk. This is the Centro Histórico de Quito, where I worked each day. It was a place of the president, of migrants, of protests, of important marches. It exposed power and poverty side by side, and it reminded me constantly why I need to continue this work, never straying too far from an environmental grounding, but never forgetting that the most vulnerable populations will experience the impacts of climate change most strongly. My second to last weekend, I hiked Cotopaxi, one of the world's largest active volcanoes that's higher than Mount Kilimanjaro. Like this summer, it's something I never thought I could do, but summiting showed me I have incredible personal resilience, and with that as a foundation, I'm inspired to work on urban resilience in socially just ways moving forward. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is LaAsia Pearson, and this summer I conducted research on the use and perceptions of social and emotional learning in South African primary schools. Social and emotional learning is a process in which students develop social and emotional skills, such as being able to recognize and control their own emotions, grow empathy towards the perspectives of others, reduce conduct problems and emotional distress, and develop better attitudes about themselves and others. Students with well-developed social and emotional skills are shown to gain a stronger connection to school, learn how to set and achieve goals, and improve academic performance, as well as have a less likelihood of becoming a teenage parent, incarcerated, or staying in poverty. I was interested in this topic because as a low-income Black woman, I've experienced much trauma throughout my life that easily could have stood in the way of my success if it was not for the positive role models and support that I had around me. But I'm very much aware that many other people from my demographic are not fortunate enough to have that support system. So I wanted to see how implementing social and emotional curriculum in schools could be a potential bridge between students like me and positively dealing with their emotions and traumas so that they could have successful lives in and outside of school. For my research, I interviewed primary teachers from a wide variety of backgrounds and asked them about their beliefs and use of social and emotional learning curriculum. I was actually able to find that there's a curriculum set in place mandatory for all grades in South Africa meant to address their social and emotional needs of students called life skills. And just for reference, this is a lot more progressive than the United States, who as of now only has 2 states with social and emotional learning curriculums for the K through 12 level. After interviewing teachers and speaking with students who took the course to receive their opinion, I found that even though life skills is the closest thing to social and emotional learning curriculum, that it still has a lot of work to do in order to have a positive impact that it's intending. Most students reported that it only talked about STDs and how not to contract them versus actually trying to develop their social and emotional skills and relationship building. But in order to conduct this research, I participated in a 6-week-long educational research study abroad program. This opportunity allowed me to expand my viewpoint and demonstrated how I can spread my influence beyond the U.S. to affect different areas of the world. Now, it wasn't like other study abroad programs where mostly kids lay on the beach and drink wine, not saying I didn't do that. But it was very immersive in the culture, and it actually gave you a lot of opportunities to immerse in the culture. For example, I was able to have homestays, this is the rural homestay that I stayed in, both in urban and rural, and there's pictures of my family that'll come up soon. But the purpose of the program was to give an in-depth understanding of the educational successes and shortcomings of the South African education system and how it's affected change throughout the country. And over the course of 6 weeks, I was able to compare different educational approaches in South Africa, such as in Johannesburg and Cape Town, visit non-governmental organizations that crafted educational policy and implement programs, and learn through observation sessions in urban and rural primary schools. I plan on pursuing a master's in international and education policy with the hopes I'll learn about some of the most challenging issues facing students and gain the tools to alleviate these obstacles. In the future, I hope to work for a non-governmental organization conducting educational research and designing programs in different countries that can be implemented to help improve access to equitable education, with the hopes of being able to reach the world's most disadvantaged learners and giving them the tools to attain a better quality of life. My experience in South Africa this summer revealed to me that although apartheid was abolished 3 decades ago, the status of South African schools are still currently suffering through the aftermath. Much of the blatant racism and segregation overtly enforced by apartheid has been transformed into being perpetuated through the education system. Schools for mostly white students during the apartheid remain in operation, while schools that serve black students are still dysfunctional and aren't able to meet the required math and literacy skills. During this program, I was able to see the stark contrast between schools with $50,000, you heard it, $50,000 tuitions, along with Olympic heated swimming pools that cater to mostly white children in the same city as schools who couldn't even afford textbooks or to pay its teaching staffs that of course mostly catered to black students. This program gave me an intensive introduction and first-hand experience in the discrepancies found in the field of international education and solidified my desire to go into this field and create a global-wide change in education. And this is a picture of me majestically sitting on, on the top of a mountain in Cape Town.
My name is Dan Sikorsky. I worked at the State Department this summer, and I have no juicy gossip about Rex Tillerson. I've been really interested in diplomacy ever since I was a kid. I always fantasized about it being a way to truly interact with other people in a way that was approachable and personable, dynamic. I saw opportunities ever since I was a kid to do that. I've been a newspaper guy since I was in high school, ever since I was a kid, really. And I thought that it was a way, as a journalist, to reach other cultures and to hear stories from other people that inform your understanding of the world and that you can then take to other people who don't have that same understanding that you do. I had a newspaper teacher in high school who at one point told me that the best student in our class was a great diplomat, and I was really jealous about that. So I sought Model UN as an option too. I started competing. I represented Argentina in one situation, which is my home country. I represented Uruguay. I represented many countries and found that yes, diplomacy was an answer to many of the world's problems and was a way to express civic agency in the world, but it did not have all the solutions. So this summer was my summer of asking, is diplomacy the civic tool for me? I explored that at the US Embassy in Rabat, Morocco, through a two-summer program. The first summer I was living in Washington, D.C., working at the main headquarters, and the second summer I was working in the political office of the embassy. Pictures were not allowed inside the embassy, but this is a Google stock image from where on the second floor I would leave my phone every day and to enter the highly classified area. All this sounds more pretentious than it actually was, but I would leave my phone there and enter the same door through which the ambassador would enter. I was working in the political office, and so I want to talk about what the pros and cons were of my vision about diplomacy. I met some really, really cool diplomats. Brian was a nerd about trade policy and found it to be the best way to kind of improve the conditions of peoples everywhere. I met Steve, who was also, who found that through the public affairs office, he did the work that was important to him. Public affairs also had me go to Dar America, which was a center in Casablanca in which students and also other Moroccans could learn about the United States and could learn about educational opportunities here. I connected some people to scholarships at Washington University as well. And it was a great way to meet actual people. My colleagues at the embassy, so 200 people at the embassy were Moroccans and 100 were Americans, and these were the 3 Moroccan colleagues of mine who worked in the political office. They were really serious in this picture on my last day. I'm not sure why, but they taught me a lot about how to look at all the news seen in Morocco and figure out which situations in human rights were important to us. I was also living with 5 interns in what was termed the intern house by everyone else at the embassy. It was, in fact, a mansion because it was where they housed all the other diplomats as well, when not at the same time as us, obviously. And they all taught me very super important things. Sophia, who was pictured on the right, was someone with whom I traveled a lot. But I also had a lot of disillusionments. The main one was that a lot of the work was office work. I found that I was quite often in the building itself, where I was working on one really big project on LGBT rights in Morocco, and I prepared a report by the end of my summer that was shipped off to Washington, D.C., where many people who work on those policies are able to apply them. I also attended a conference on Defeat ISIS. I was the principal note taker, and I sat in the corner. It made me think, though, that a lot of policy was just talking, and it didn't actually go into the ground as I was hoping it would, to discuss with people the problems that they were facing in the world. I also was really wary starting my summer of identifying the United States as a sort of police of the world, and that's a critique that's often made. I didn't see too many signs of it. In fact, I was actually surprised at how reserved the embassy was on certain issues and how much they listened to the embassy itself, to Morocco itself on the issues that mattered to them. I was also often on the sidelines. The State Department is a very hierarchical organization, and it takes until you get to the top of the game, as the prime ambassador in residence was. It took until you get to those stages to actually have a very big influence. I still, at the end of the day, tried to make the experience while I was there my own, and every weekend that I was there, without stop, I would leave the embassy and go straight to the train station and try to visit as many cities as I could to meet with different people in different cities. So this was in Chefchaouen, one of the cities there. I learned from people like him who made a bunch of different purses, and I learned from the woman who made the bread every single week that I ate. And I found that at the end I wasn't sure what my view of diplomacy was, and that I see the pros and the cons, and I don't know if it will be the vessel through which I will make the differences in the world I'd like to make, but it was nevertheless something that I wanted to try out, and I did, and I have answers and more questions too.
So that concludes our first half of the Civic Scholar presentations. We want to invite you all to a reception out in the main hall for the next half hour, and then we'll return promptly at 6:30 to hear the other half of exciting presentations. Thank you. Please connect and ask them more questions about their project.
1, 2. everyone. Thanks so much for sticking it out with us. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Purvi Patel, and I happen to have the privilege of being the co-instructor for this cohort. I'm really excited it was really moving to see the first group go, and I know that there's a number of supporters in the room, so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you all. We have campus partners, folks who have guest taught in the program, folks that are supporters of and friends of the Gephardt Institute. So thank you so much for coming. It takes a village, and we know that certainly the summers don't capture the extent of our student civic leadership, but we are so grateful for you taking the time that you've already taken to pour into our students, and for you taking the time to celebrate their accomplishments thus far in the program. I want to take a moment to especially acknowledge Dr. Joe Marcus and Drs. Margaret Olson, who are supporters of the program as donors. Tammy Cavaretta, who leads the giving and donor relations for the Gephardt Institute and is particularly a strong supporter of the Civic Scholars Program, and our fearless leader, Stephanie Kurtzman, without whom the trains would not run on time, and we certainly would be lost in all of our civic lives without her. So thank you so much for all of your support, all of your hard work and dedication. Without this, none of our students would have the resources that they need to pursue some of their civic dreams, and so we're really, really grateful. And then I will just hand it back to the students, because I think they're the stars of the show and are truly the best part of tonight. And so I'll, without further ado, introduce Megal Ship.
Start whenever. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Megal, and I spent this summer in Chicago, where I interned at two different nonprofits, the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, which I'll refer to as SAPRI, and Heart Women and Girls. And I worked on two different issues that are very pertinent to South Asian Americans today, which is immigration policy as well as access to comprehensive and culturally sensitive sexual health information. And so as a child of immigrants and as someone who has grown up in a culture where sexual health is heavily stigmatized, I really wanted to work with South Asian organizers to address these two issues, whether that be through trying to directly influence immigration policy, or whether that be trying to disseminate accurate and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health curriculum. And so first I'll talk a little bit about my work at SAPRI. So at SAPRI, the main project I worked on was trying to collect the narratives of South Asian women who have immigrated to the United States on H-4 visas. And so South Asians in general predominantly immigrate to the United States on two different visas, H-1B visas and H-4 visas. And recently the Trump administration has rescinded work authorization for H-4 visa holders. And so this has had really detrimental effects on South Asian women, especially because a lot of them have utilized work authorization as a way to make a living wage outside of their spouses and to be economically independent. And so we're seeing lots of really detrimental effects of the of work authorization being rescinded. And so one of my first tasks at SAPRI was actually helping SAPRI apply for a small grant through the Chicago Foundation for Women. They have economic empowerment grants, and so luckily we were fortunate enough to actually get the grant and start the project. And so really what the project really started was like trying to put together a report on the importance of H-4 visas. And so what I also got to do actually was look at 20 years of H-4 visa data to try and look at the numbers. And what we saw is that 98% of H-4 visa holders are Indian women, and the numbers of work authorization given to H-4 visa holders has decreased over 20 years, making it an even more pertinent issue. The second phase was also to try and develop an interview kind of sheet to kind of interview South Asian women about their H-4 status and their work authorization status. And some of the example questions involved talking about how the removal of work authorization has affected being able to work and emotional health, mental health, and those kinds of things. Aside from the immigration project, I was able to also help SAPRI with their various other events over the summer. So one of the big events that they had was called a HIMSA, which means nonviolence, and they put it on at different parks across Chicago. And really what it was a dance performance where young girls performed Bharatanatyam, which is Indian classical dance. And after that, there was a panel discussion with community leaders and activists on what nonviolence looks like in their communities and what it means to bridge the cultural gap. And so it was really cool being able to actually write the press releases for these events, as well as put together materials and promotion materials to garner people to come to these events, as well as just in general, like listen to these really cool activists. And so in general, my time at SAPRI was filled with a lot of growth and learning. I was able to work with really, really incredible South Asian activists, like the people pictured here, on issues that are very important to the South Asian community. And in general, just learned a lot and got to do a lot of really cool work. Now, my internship at Hart, on the other hand, was a very different experience, and a really great one, too. Hart is located all virtually, so everything I did was online, and I didn't have a lot of direct supervision in terms of my project, so a lot of it was led on my own time. And what I was really tasked with doing there was trying to put together culturally sensitive sexual health blog posts on various different topics, like menstruation, contraception, STDs, and STIs. And when taking a look at the website before it was able to be updated, a lot of the posts were really long, drawn out, hard to understand, didn't have a lot of images, which can make it really hard for young people to understand and read. And so I really had to go in and try to simplify these things. And so this is kind of an example of how I try to write something for HIV. We know that HIV has such a complex science behind it, and it can be really hard to simplify that for young people. And so in trying to put together pictures and kind of simplify the science, it was something that I struggled with, but also something that I really cared about and was really glad I got to work with the sexual health portion as well. And so finally, I'll wrap out my talk talking about a really cool conference I went to at the end of my summer. It's called the Youth Leadership Institute by South Asian Americans Leading Together, and it was in Washington, D.C. The theme was community defense, which tied in really well with my project on immigration policy. In general, just being able to work and be with 16 incredible South Asian femmes was a really cool experience. And I think in general really solidified my commitment to wanting to work for and advocate for South Asian issues in whichever career path I go down in my life. One consistent theme throughout my summer was South Asian community and working for South Asians. And that's something that I hope to continue in whichever way I go down, which I hope will be a good way. So, yes, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so through classwork, interviews, and personal experience, I've come to understand accessibility as a critical driver of health outcomes. Hoping to further understand this subject and contribute to solving mobility issues in the region, through my Civic Scholars Project, I was motivated to explore both the intersection of health and transit and the city that I've been living in for the last 4 years. I decided to work at Bi-State Development, a quasi-governmental economic development organization that primarily operates the public transportation in St. Louis. Through an informal interview, I met my boss, Lisa Cagle, a strong female mentor with an undying enthusiasm for equitable transit. I worked under Lisa in the Bi-State Research Institute, a nonprofit within the larger corporation that leverages existing transportation infrastructure to integrate community-centered programs and do policy research and planning. On the first day on the job, I went to a press conference with Mayor Cruson at the Riverview Transit Center, where we announced the beginning of a new bi-state partnership with People's Health Centers. Their mobile health van will rotate between metro stations each week, screening people for hypertension and diabetes and connecting community members with resources, such as insurance or local community health centers. Together, our goal is to meet people where they are. This project exemplifies the philosophy of placemaking, creating public spaces, in this case transit centers, that promote people's health, happiness, and well-being. By bringing health services and food providers to transit stations, people can access critical services on their way to and from work that would otherwise be inaccessible. By helping to maintain ongoing Bi-State Research Institute projects, such as the mobile health screening units or the Link Market grocery stores, I learned how to put the placemaking philosophy into practice. Talking to community members at the North Hanley Metro Station Summer Festival, I witnessed the community investment in these Link Markets. Operated by members of the community, Link Market patrons expressed their excitement about the variety and affordability of the foods otherwise not accessible to them. While these glitzy press conferences and summer food festivals were an exciting way to start the summer, most of my time was spent at this lovely double-wide cubicle doing research to pass along to Lisa. I conducted research on a variety of issues, designing a transit equity metric, transportation safety and security, and comparative fare structures. Through my research, I learned a lot about transit-oriented development, or TOD. This urban planning idea hopes to activate public transit spaces through mixed-use development, having businesses, housing, leisure spaces, and pedestrian infrastructure surrounding a transit center. By having people around the station at all times of the day, this philosophy hopes to push out loitering or more negative activity in favor of more positive activity. Using these principles, I created a transit-oriented development scorecard, a tool for the city to use when determining tax incentives. When developers apply for a permit to develop a new project located within a quarter-mile radius of the transit center, they'll be encouraged to comply with our scorecard in order to receive tax incentives. This includes having mixed-income housing, office space, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and complete streets. I also contributed to a transit-oriented design research study on the proposed Northside-Southside Metro alignment. Bi-State's goal is to proactively design transit-oriented development around the proposed metro stops to showcase the potential economic development that will stem from this new large infrastructure project. This will hopefully convince government officials and large donors that it's worthwhile to invest in the new Metrolink line. Another exciting highlight was being involved with the bird and lime scooter phenomena. Bi-State Development put together an advisory committee to ensure an equitable implementation of these scooters in St. Louis, dividing the scooters equally throughout the city and developing ways for people without smartphones or credit cards to also enjoy the scooters. So coming away from this experience, I've been thinking a lot about city-level sustainable economic development. While I don't have an answer for what this should look like, I do believe that it requires a combination of large-scale, permanent infrastructure projects like the Northside-Southside alignment that takes decades to complete but are imperative for the future of our city, and small-scale temporary projects like the bird and lime scooters that are headed by individuals and generate excitement and energy for the city. I also recognize the importance of public-private partnerships, like the new Cortex Metro Station, which is the first metro station built in St. Louis in the last 30 years. It would never have happened without support from both public and private investment. Seeing my friends zoom around on bird scooters and watching people hop on the metro at the Skinker station, I'm proud to have contributed to the liveliness of this city. After staring at maps all summer, connecting with community members, and understanding municipal politics, I feel deeply connected to St. Louis. These experiences and philosophies of sustainable economic development will influence both my future career trajectory and ultimately my civic identity.
My name is Anand. I spent this past summer in Boston working with homeless men as a medical case manager at the Southampton Street Shelter in the South End neighborhood of Boston. In my role, I assisted patients with day-to-day needs, primarily applying for social services like Medicaid and food stamps, going with them to social service and medical appointments, and transitioning into housing and into community. I was particularly focused on the triangulation of poverty, severe mental illness, homelessness, incarceration, and substance use disorder. I'm specifically interested in the unique health needs and burdens of individuals who are caught in the revolving door between incarceration and poverty. Many individuals who are homeless suffer from co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorder. In the South End of Boston, it was primarily heroin use and cocaine use. The revolving door is my backdrop this summer. On the left is a map showing the location of important social services and drug treatment programs in the area. Actually, that's on the right. And on this side is the South Bay House of Corrections, and I'm taking the picture from the entrance to the shelter. The jail and the homeless shelter share a parking lot, making clear the spatial and social connection between the two. I was working for Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. They are a leading healthcare for the homeless model solely due to the effect of Romney Care, which ensures nearly universal healthcare in Massachusetts. They use the bridge you can see up there as their logo to indicate the bridge that they provide between social services and medical care. In the middle of my first week, Dr. Chatterjee, my mentor, introduced me to a man I'll call for the rest of this presentation Joseph. Joseph was a prime target of the state, a young, poor black man. Born in the Dominican Republic, he moved to Roxbury when he was 10 and started using drugs at the age of 14. Joseph had been a regular patient of the clinic. He had previously been prescribed Suboxone, a treatment option for opioid use disorder. The drug, however, was not showing up in his urine, leading Dr. Chatterjee to prescribe methadone, a stronger and clinic-based treatment. Methadone maintenance is a treatment that requires a daily visit to the clinic. Imagine having to visit the same clinic every morning for the next 6 months. Joseph was hesitant to visit a methadone clinic. He didn't want to be addicted to another substance and didn't want to have to visit a clinic every morning. Nevertheless, he showed up at 9 a.m. for his appointment with me to make the call. 9 a.m., however, was too late. We missed the intake hours at both clinics, which were arbitrarily between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. We were stalled like this over the next 3 weeks. A sick intake coordinator, a week to process the intake, the list went on. During this time, Joseph was trying to figure out how to secure a job. He was struggling because of his previous encounters with the criminal justice system and his opioid use disorder. A heroin user once told me, "The feeling that you get from withdrawal is the worst feeling in the world. I refuse to experience that again." To maintain throughout the weeks that Joseph was not on either Suboxone or methadone, he was constantly using heroin. Joseph had a strong jawline and a wiry frame. He stood at a striking 6'3" and was constantly joking around. If given the chance to attend high school, he would have been the charismatic class clown. In character, during one of our many meetings that summer, he asked, "Yo, I keep using and I've stopped getting high. I can do 7 or 8 times as much and I don't feel it anymore. But fentanyl, every time I use it, I overdose. Why is that?" Joseph was particularly interested in the biochemical basis of tolerance and how fentanyl, an elephant tranquilizer 100 times stronger than heroin, overrides tolerance. We made it into a methadone clinic during the 4th week. If you're keeping track now, we're 3 weeks late. We filled out the form to begin treatment, assuming to get the first dose that day. We were stopped by a nurse, however, who said the doctor wasn't in that day and that he needed to review the form that we had submitted, now marking 4 weeks late. Joseph never ended up starting on methadone. He was hesitant to start with, and the beginning of his methadone maintenance coincided with the banning of him from its shelter. Joseph got into a fight, I'm not sure about what, and was barred from the shelter for about a month. I honestly believe he was happier that way. It was difficult to see him consistently after that, and our relationship tapered off. I was working with some other guys on accessing emergency aid and Social Security, and given that he was unable to come into the clinic and the shelter, it was difficult to alleviate his fears about methadone. I saw Joseph on my 3rd to last day at this intersection. He hadn't stopped using heroin, but was working on stabilizing himself economically. After skipping his first interview due to a lack of pants, he said that he had gotten a job in a local Guatemalan restaurant, but on that day was having difficulty getting to work. I gave him my T-pass because his boss, he told me, was going to fire him if he didn't come in today because he had already missed 2 days. That was the last I saw of Joseph. Joseph passed away a week after my internship ended. He had overdosed on fentanyl and was found in an alley from a street from down the shelter. Dr. Chatterjee called to tell me and I cried. There was a lot of shared guilt among us at the staff at the clinic that week. If only we had pushed him a little bit harder to go on methadone, maybe he would still be here. Someone's death isn't and shouldn't be a lesson. To me, it felt more like a reminder that all of us in that moment failed. Joseph's death was easily preventable, but also felt predestined in the status quo. And now I want to take a moment to address the myriad of policies that contributed to his death. The macro, like economic and racial segregation, the felon label, down to the micro, the timing of the methadone clinic's intake assessments and his lack of access to pants. We all have a role to play in ensuring that these deaths don't happen again. And when we talk about writing policy or working in policy, we have to remember that every clause, every piece of legislation, every semicolon, every set of rules that we write as future civic agents has massive downstream effects that are magnified for those who are most marginalized. To me, that's remembering Joseph and our jokes and our candid conversations as I set out to be a physician activist. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam Messenger, and I'm going to be speaking about my civic summer experience aiming to help those on the organ donor transplant list. So this is a picture of my mom and I this past summer. My mom, Celine, she's one of 115,000 people in America waiting for a life-saving organ, and she's also on the transplant list. And so I did this project for her. So as I said, there are 115,000 people in America on the waiting list. About 27,000 transplants were performed this past year. And there's a growing gap. So the amount of people added to the list is at a faster rate than the people getting transplants. And there's a nonprofit that manages the list. It's called UNOS. And as you see, the rate is rising. And so one reason for that is there isn't enough of an organ supply. And I wanted to aim to solve that issue. And I particularly wanted to do it in the Jewish community. So Jews donate lower than average in the population because of a misconception of Jewish law. So this is the organization that I worked for and found. And it works to reach out to the Jewish community, encourage them to donate, and also get over some of the misconceptions that they're not permitted by Jewish law to donate. And then in the next photo, you'll see the office that we worked in. So it was an under-resourced nonprofit. We had 3 employees, and then I was the 4th for this summer. We were borrowing office space from a law firm to cut down on costs. And I learned a lot about nonprofits and the need to do the best that you can with what you have. And so this is part of my commute. So I lived up in the Bronx. I commuted down to Manhattan. So on the left is the Hudson River and the train line that I took. And then the office was across the street from Grand Central Station. And so a share of my civic budget went just to transportation. So this isn't the most appealing image, but it's an example of the amount of work that we had to do a month before the annual 5K fundraiser. This is just part of the list, and so that was the first leg of my project, and it was important to them that they had an additional person working on this to get that done. This is a picture of some of the participants at our 5K race. It was the first week of June. It was great to meet the people that were serving in the nonprofit, families that have been participating for many years in the race. And you see some new participants, some older ones, some very young ones. And we raised about $120,000, which is a quarter of the budget. And so that was, it was really great to be a part of that. You see some of our happy participants, some very young ones and some more experienced ones. All excited to be a part of this cause. And here's a picture of the volunteers. I'm in the back, proof that I was there. I brought some friends as well. Some of the people in the blue shirts are the full-time employees, and we got there at about 7 a.m. and worked all day setting up and running the event. I wasn't able to run, fortunately for me, but I was able to hand the runners water and cheer them on. The second leg of the project was about a week long, and it was just tying up loose ends following our 5K race. So this is just an image of me compiling different photos taken at the race and sending it to the runners, thanking them for attending. And then following that, the last part of my project involved doing a lot of smaller tasks. Here was when I was creating educational materials for UNOS, which is the organization that I talked about that runs the organ donor list. And I was making materials to educate them on the different facets of the Jewish community so they can better serve their clients. And so you see that. And then I also worked on an interfaith website regarding organ donation. So I found the images, crafted the materials, and designed it. It's not posted yet, but will be soon. And there's a longer list of different projects that I worked on, but the one that I found important was leveraging technology to help them improve their processes. There are 3 people working there. And so here are some examples of the apps that I helped them use to improve their communication and their proposal creation and also their social media outreach. And then going forward, I want to be involved in the nonprofit organization, but I'm also thinking about policy in that area. And going forward, I want to be involved in other nonprofits as well, all the while working full-time at the intersection of technology and social impact. So thank you very much.
Hi. My name is Gabby Perez Garcia, and this summer I worked at a suicide prevention program for Latinas in New York. As a first-generation American, I have been exposed to the difficulties that face immigrants and children of immigrants throughout my whole life. The story of my parents' transition from Lima, Peru to the United States has been told to me and my siblings throughout our childhood. The shift between a South American culture and an American one created a cultural barrier as I was forced to inhabit a sort of in-between state. I was not fully immersed in either an American culture nor a Peruvian one. As I grew older, I became more and more aware of the unifying nature of this phenomenon and trend among immigrants. These all-encompassing stressors contribute to the disparity of mental health care that affects Latinx individuals. Discrepancies in cultural competency and basic Spanish fluency prevent this population from receiving the adequate care. 15.1% of Latina adolescents in the U.S. tried to take their own lives 1 or more times. In New York City, the number for the same group was 13.2%. In Brooklyn, it was 13.4%. In the Bronx, it was 13.0%, and in Queens, it was 16.4%. As these children immigrate from Latin American countries or grow up as first or second generation Americans, if this disparity is not addressed, the problem becomes normalized and it continues to exist. The parents themselves, not equipped to combat this mixed culture environment, do not know how to teach their children healthy ways to cope. This issue becomes a feedback loop. The fear of becoming a statistic and an intuitive desire to prevent others from becoming prone to these influences led me to Communal Life and Life is Precious. Life is Precious is a suicide prevention program in New York serving Latina youth from the ages of 12 to 18. The program offers services that are culturally and linguistically fluent for the girls. These services include art therapy, music therapy, group counseling, and a healthy eating initiative, as you will see on the screen. This program has been overwhelmingly well received by these communities and effective. It has assisted more than 300 girls to this date. I was even able to attend the program's 10th anniversary of the institution of this program, which showcased the girls' art and musical abilities. One of the first things I noticed as I began my work at Life is Precious was the diversity found even within these 3 sites. In Brooklyn, the demographic consisted of girls of Mexican, Venezuelan, and Dominican descent. In Queens, the girls themselves or their parents were immigrants from Ecuador, Mexico, or the Dominican Republic. In the Bronx, the population was heavily Puerto Rican and Dominican. I realized early on that the girls' background was an important characteristic to acknowledge when assisting them, because usually this influenced their perspective of the world and their unique struggles. I recall one of the girls who recently immigrated from the Dominican Republic. She was telling me about how she didn't feel at home at the United States and she missed her previous life. She felt disconnected from her extended and immediate family, which made it difficult for her to fully assimilate. I resonated with this feeling of displacement and not belonging coming from a majority white high school. Another instance of this acknowledgement of the background was during one of our Topic Tuesdays. The subject that was brought up was immigration. As we began the discussion, one of the girls admitted to me that she was undocumented and mentioned offhand that she had 7 more years in this country until she would be recognized as a citizen. I could not imagine not being certain whether you would be able to stay in your home country for another given day. I was also overcome by the aspirations of the girls. Many of the girls in high school told me that they one day hoped to become doctors, lawyers, or engineers. But when I brought up the topic of college applications, they were not even aware of the timing of the cycle of this, financial aid options, the schools that were outside of immediate proximity to them, or financial aid options, sorry. Coincidentally, it was also during my stay at the program that Congressman Ocasio-Cortez was nominated for the Democratic primary. As a Bronx native and Latina woman, she was an excellent role model for the girls from the Bronx and the other sites. However, though these girls have an idea of success around them, there is a disconnect between these goals and the tools they need to achieve them. Coming from the landlocked state of Texas, I am grateful to have seen a different side of the country with unique difficulties facing immigrant communities. In a more concentrated urban environment, I saw the girls were growing up faster than I did and were exposed to more mature topics at an earlier age, such as a recent murder occurring in a bodega adjacent to the program in the Bronx. These girls should not have to worry about the safety in their own neighborhood along with the stresses of growing up. The way the program sought to address this cultural competency issue of mental health was by holding trainings every Wednesday after staff meetings. We were introduced to the multicultural approach, which essentially made sure that we are aware of the family dynamics outside of these girls' unique mental health struggles. My experience with the program has exposed me to the evident need and a potential structure for proper mental health care in Latinx populations. This is an issue that cannot be fully solved without full participation and collaboration, and I hope to see the stigma reduced even more in years to come. And this is the picture of the recent murder in the Bronx, or the person who was murdered.
Hi everyone, I'm James Schisler, and I spent my summer at home in St. James, Missouri. St. James is a small, relatively rural town about 2 hours from St. Louis. We have about 4,000 people. For context, that's about 100 more people than WashU has faculty. So it's a little different. And that's not as uncommon as you might think. On the map, you can see a huge chunk of the US is predominantly rural. And I believe that you can't really understand just one aspect of any community. I set out to look at education, but I realized to really understand that and make an impact, I needed to understand policy and background, the history of everything that was happening. So I started reading. I spent a ton of time reading this summer. It was wonderful. I read around 30 books across a huge number of topics, and I learned so much. The ideas are still bouncing around in my head. I'm still figuring out exactly what I'm going to do with all of them. Another part of my summer was traveling. It might seem strange. I got to go to Ohio and Kentucky. Not too far away, but that was, I believe, the 10th and 11th time I left the state. So that was a really great experience for me that probably wouldn't have been possible otherwise. While I was traveling, I got to learn from experts in the field. This was a panel at the first ever Rural College Access and Success Summit, which was held in Lexington, Kentucky. I was able to go to this and get in on the ground floor of something that I think is going to be more and more important in our country going forward. I participated in discussions, learned from people who are doing really amazing work in this, and received a lot of validation and learned that some of the things I had experienced as someone coming from a rural background and some of the ideas that were popping up as I was reading things were things that everyone else was thinking about too. I also got to see Maddie while I was in Lexington. Along with that, attending the conference and reading, I made sure to make time for reflecting in my summer. That was really important to me as I tried to process through what it means to me to have grown up where I did. Coming into college, I wouldn't have described St. James as rural. It's the second biggest town in like a 50-mile circle. But after reading more about education and sociology and all of these different things, I feel like I have a richer understanding of my own background, but also how it's similar and different to the backgrounds of others and other people around me. So one thing that popped up as I was reading all of this was that there's no consistent definition of rural. Every government agency uses its own. Some government agencies have more than one. I think the US Department of Agriculture has 9. That makes it literally impossible to compare data meaningfully. You see a graph and you're like, oh wait, that's got different numbers than this graph. And it does, because they're looking at different people. But you still see lots of things like this, where rural America crashed, like everything did in 2008, and then didn't really come back. This is job growth. There's been very little job growth in rural America since 2010. And so I think part of why this is all important is our current political climate. Regardless of who you think should be in office, it would be foolish to ignore the impact that rural America has on the state of our country's politics today. And so often it gets forgotten or reduced to just one dimension. And I think that that leads to some of the changes and the surprise that a lot of people, at least in the WashU community, have expressed about the 2016 and somewhat in the 2018 elections. Next slide. So there's lots of problems in rural America that I didn't know about that showed up in the data. You can see American workers in poverty, lack of broadband access, expansion of poverty, increased rates of disability. All of these things are incredibly prevalent in rural areas. And that's something that I'm still wrestling with and trying to figure out the best way to attack. But despite these being huge, large-scale problems, I think it's important to work one-on-one individually with people. So I spoke with students about going to college and how they can better prepare for a college search process from my local high school. I spent a couple hours attending classes and talking with them, and then I held an individual session working just with a small group of students. And I think that's the key to remember. No matter how big the problem is, it always starts somewhere, and we can make a difference by working one-on-one with other people.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah, and this summer I had the incredible opportunity to spend 7 weeks in South Jakarta, Indonesia, working with Rutgers WPF, which is based in the Netherlands, and they really work to promote sexual health and reproductive health around the world. I was interested in this project because growing up in Malaysia, I was always exposed to a culture that really stigmatized discussions about sexual health and interpersonal violence. And coming to WashU, it was really the first time I experienced discussions that were comprehensive, and which is much too late in my opinion. And so that really got me interested in kind of navigating cultural and religious barriers in terms of sexual health education and how this affects interpersonal violence. At Rutgers, there were about 20 staff members, 4 men and the rest were women, and this was really an incredible environment to be around, with strong women working to make a change in a community that limited their own powers over their own bodies. The office was split into 3 different spaces, and as you can see in the next picture,
You work really closely with one another, and all of my coworkers were working on different programs, which is really incredible to kind of foster this environment of collaboration, as well as kind of exploring everyone's different perspectives as we're talking to each other about their stories and their own ideas when they're coming to solutions for their programs. The main program that I worked on was called You and Me with my supervisor, Afra. And this was really a comprehensive sexual health education for children aged 4 to 6 in order to kind of teach them sexual health at a younger age and it's an age-appropriate method. I was able to read through the latest draft and provide my own perspective coming from the US and kind of provide my own input on the lessons and the different activities. The purpose of this program is to teach children social skills and promote sexual health at a younger age so that they really retain these values much better as they get older. And in addition, the program also aims to prevent childhood sexual abuse, which is a big problem in sexual violence that's often overlooked by organizations. The curriculum includes 9 different modules, including things like how to take care of their bodies, breaking gender stereotypes in terms of future goals, reproduction, the people in their life that they can trust, as well as how to protect their body and get out of uncomfortable situations. The curriculum also comes with a toolkit, and this is used to engage the children so that they really retain the information, including these dolls that are used for the curriculum in order to teach about biological differences between males and females in reproduction with the baby doll. And then this chart is an activity that kind of shows inappropriate versus appropriate touch. Another program that I had the privilege to work on was called Dance for Life, which was in collaboration with the organization based in Amsterdam. And this program really is a peer-led sexual health discussion led by people who've gone to training with high school students. And this really includes different activities, and the curriculum ends with a big celebration to really unite every individual that successfully completes it. I participated as a note taker in a 4-day contextualization workshop for this program with partnerships with different organizations like Family Planning and Red Cross Indonesia. And this is where I learned a lot about the most prevalent sexual health issues such as unsafe sex leading to STDs and sexual and domestic violence that were widespread in the country. In addition, we had discussions about policies that really restrict access to sexual health resources such as contraception that really limited the power of the women in order to make that decision for their bodies. And this was facilitated by representatives from Amsterdam, so hearing their perspectives was incredible, but also the participants were local Indonesians, and they really read through every lesson and activity in the curriculum to make sure it was prevalent for Indonesian youth and were culturally sensitive. Within those days, I was able to really see firsthand how important it is to include community members when you're trying to make solutions and come up with initiatives to really help a community that you're not a part of. I also did some traveling in my time in Indonesia. Some things that I learned include religious tensions in the country, being the largest Muslim majority country, but there was also a large Christian population, which really you can see in how this big mosque is right across the street from a cathedral. And through my internship, I learned a lot about how religion played a big role in this country in terms of determining sexual health education. I also met a lot of Europeans in the hostel that I stayed at during one of my trips, including my new Swiss friend, Karina. And these interactions really made me think about how being half Malay and kind of being able to speak the language was a big privilege for me, because most of the time I was perceived as a local, and my presence in the country wasn't really thought as being abnormal, and that really helped my transition into the country. As a mode of reflection, I did a lot of journaling every single day to really reflect on what I did, what I learned, and how this really made me feel throughout the process. And I'm still unsure if, when, and how I'll incorporate my project in my future goals, but I know that advocating for sexual and reproductive health is something that I'll be passionate about for the rest of my life. Thank you.
There you go. You're on, my friend.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. See, do I clip this on my...
Just put it in your pocket.
I can just do it in my pocket.
Yeah.
You're right, you're right.
Between the...
Okay. Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name's Otis, and this will be a little presentation on my civic summer. So, This is a picture of the Sebil. This is a monument found in the center of Sarajevo, and Sarajevo is the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Bosnia is a country located in Eastern Europe in the Balkan region, and interestingly enough, in the next picture, we'll see Sarajevo again, but in a different light. Here, we see pure destruction. So this destruction came as a result of the ethnic conflict and subsequent war and genocide in Bosnia in the early 90s. As a result of this, there were a lot of refugees, and interestingly enough, a lot of them ended up in St. Louis. And here we see, interestingly enough again, the Sebil, but this time in St. Louis. This serves as a symbol to the strong Bosnian community that has developed here in St. Louis. There are currently 70,000 Bosnians in St. Louis, the largest concentration outside of Bosnia. So given this large community and shared generational trauma, the Bosnians of St. Louis have their own stories to be told. And that is what I wanted to do with my project. I wanted to collect oral narratives and photographs of Bosnian American individuals relating to the concept of home in the hopes of amplifying that story and these experiences to the broader St. Louis community. So specifically, I wanted to focus on a thread that was close to home, the first generation experience. I myself am a first generation Bosnian American, and I grew up straddling the cultural norms found inside of my home with those found outside of my home. And I wanted to extend that experience to my peers to see how they define home, not necessarily as a place of residence, but rather as a process of making sense of place with historical and generational roots tied to somewhere else. So with my project, I plan to have pop-up exhibits documenting the oral narratives and photographs, but I also plan to work with Fontbonne and contribute some of the oral narratives to their archives to help establish an enduring record of Bosnian genocide survivors. So now speaking more to the individuals that I talked with, the individuals I talked with had different experiences and perspectives. Some felt very strong ties to their cultural homeland, whether that be practicing their religion actively, such as going to mosque, wearing traditional dress, or participating in family dinners and participating in religious events. Others found interpersonal connection as a way to sort of maintain that cultural connection and find a sense of place. One of the individuals that I talked to actually ended up marrying a Bosnian woman at the age of 21, and the way he described it was that he didn't see himself being with anyone else, and it was more of a cultural thing. But there is something even more beautiful in this, at least from my perspective. It seemed that this sort of cultural connection served as a staple of relationship, whether it be the different individuals telling me how they shared experiences with how their parents may have mispronounced words, or how their parents may have beckoned them over to talk to some sort of customer service representative who couldn't understand them. These sort of shared experiences add an indescribable sense of comfort to a relationship. Other individuals that I talked to found a sense of place in personal objectives and interests, whether it be this individual who I interviewed who just felt a lot of passion for his car, and his passion of maintaining his car came from this sort of work ethic that he saw from his parents as they helped provide for him growing up. Then another individual I talked to who opened up her own salon. Her passion for beauty and hair care came from playing with their mom at a young age, but her desire to actually see her salon and develop it came from seeing her mom, who was a refugee, start out as a grocery store shelf stocker and work her way up to being a pharmaceutical sales rep, all while trying to kind of make it work for her growing up. So these last two examples, I think, speak to a sort of perspective you can take where there is a sense of maybe assimilation or Americanization, but I would rather like to think more about what it means to find place, and I think that can take the form of eschewing cultural practices and values, or eschewing cultural practices while still finding solace in family and values. And with my last slide, I left it blank intentionally because there is no necessarily neat way to wrap this up, nor can I wrap it up in under 20 seconds, so just bear with me. But the one thing that I kind of came to the conclusion was that these every one of the people that I've talked to held different perspectives, and those perspectives we could try to determine if they're good. We could try to determine if they're subjectively good or bad as much as we want. But instead, the thing that I would like to focus on is that we all have threads that bring us together as humans, whether that be love and passion, community and belonging, determination and motivation, whatever else you can think of, and we all express these threads differently based on our backgrounds. And the one thing that I sort of want to stress is that none of us express them better or worse than the next person. So, thank you very much.
So that concludes our presentations. Can we just have one more round of applause? And thank you all for coming and supporting our students. Like Purvi said, it does take a village, and your support, whether financially, emotionally, intellectually, has really helped to shepherd our students along in their process. And it doesn't end here, right? Like I said, the presentation is one, or the project is one piece and a tool for understanding how do we deepen our own civic agency, what are the commitments that we want to make beyond our time here at Washington University, because I know no matter what they do, as many of them have said, the future is still long, I hope, for many of you. And that you will integrate this as a part of your journey onto whatever happens next for you. So with that, again, thank you so much for coming and supporting our students. And please connect with them and hear more about what they worked on and what they continue to dream as part of their civic journeys. Well done, y'all.